What to do when you feel lost in life? Viktor Frankl's answer. There are moments in life when nothing seems obviously wrong, and yet everything feels empty. You wake up, fulfill your responsibilities, move through routines, and still carry a quiet sense of disorientation. Not pain intense enough to name, not loss dramatic enough to explain, just a persistent feeling of being lost. Viktor Frankl believed this state was one of the most dangerous conditions of the modern human being. Not despair caused by tragedy, but emptiness born from meaninglessness. In the past, suffering often came from deprivation. Today, it often comes from abundance without direction. People are exhausted not because life is too hard, but because it feels internally hollow. Frankl observed that when life no longer asks anything of us, when no task, value, or responsibility calls us forward, the soul begins to drift. Anxiety, burnout, and depression often follow, not as diseases of weakness, but as signals of a deeper existential vacuum. Frankl's answer to feeling lost was never positive thinking or motivation. He did not ask, "What do I expect from life?" He reversed the question entirely. "What is life asking of me now?" This shift, subtle but radical, reframes confusion not as a failure, but as an invitation. Feeling lost, in Frankl's view, is often the moment before meaning becomes visible. If you feel disoriented, this is not where the story ends. It may be where it finally begins, the silent crisis of feeling lost. Feeling lost rarely arrives with chaos. It enters quietly. Life continues to function on the surface while something essential erodes underneath. You meet expectations, maintain routines, and even experience moments of pleasure. Yet none of it connects to a deeper sense of direction. Viktor Frankl identified this condition as the most widespread psychological struggle of modern life. Not acute suffering, but the absence of meaning. In earlier generations, meaning was often imposed by necessity. Survival demanded effort. Relationships were bound by responsibility, and identity was shaped by contribution. Today, many people are free from immediate threats, yet that freedom has created a new burden. When nothing demands meaning from us, the inner compass weakens. Frankl observed that when meaning is no longer discovered, it must be chosen. And most people are never taught how to choose it. This is why feeling lost is so common even among those who appear successful. Achievement without purpose becomes hollow. Comfort without direction produces restlessness. The human mind does not tolerate meaninglessness for long. When purpose fades, symptoms emerge. Anxiety that has no clear cause, burnout without overwork, sadness without loss. These are not failures of character. They are existential alarms. Frankl called this state the existential vacuum. It is the space left when life no longer feels personally addressed to you. In this vacuum, people attempt to fill the emptiness with stimulation, distraction, productivity, or pleasure. But the emptiness remains, because meaning cannot be consumed. It must be lived. According to Frankl, the feeling of being lost is not evidence that something is broken inside you. It is evidence that something essential is waiting to be answered. Meaning does not announce itself with clarity. It emerges when a person recognizes that life is still asking a question, even in confusion. Why modern life creates emptiness instead of fulfillment. One of Viktor Frankl's most unsettling insights was that meaninglessness often increases as life becomes easier. When survival no longer requires daily struggle, the question of why to live replaces the question of how to live. Modern society solved many external problems, but in doing so, it exposed an internal one. When life stops demanding something from us, we begin demanding answers from life itself, and that is where many people become lost. Frankl noticed that previous generations inherited meaning through tradition, responsibility, and necessity. Roles were clearer. Suffering, though harsh, was structured. Today, freedom has expanded faster than our capacity to use it wisely. People are told they can be anything, but not why they should be anything at all. Without a guiding why, choice becomes paralysis. Freedom without orientation turns into exhaustion. This is why so many people feel empty, even while living objectively comfortable lives. They are not overwhelmed by hardship. They are underwhelmed by purpose. The days blur together because nothing inside them feels uniquely demanded. When no value claims priority, everything feels equally unimportant. Frankl warned that this condition quietly erodes psychological stability. The mind searches for intensity when it cannot find meaning, often through workaholism, addiction, constant stimulation, or emotional drama. Importantly, Frankl rejected the idea that happiness is a valid life goal. Happiness, he argued, cannot be pursued directly. It emerges as a byproduct of meaning. When people chase happiness itself, they often amplify dissatisfaction. Pleasure fades, motivation collapses, and the deeper emptiness remains untouched. Modern life encourages asking, "What will make me feel better?" Frankl insisted on a different question. What gives this moment meaning, regardless of how it feels? That distinction is critical. Meaning does not promise comfort. It offers coherence. It connects suffering, effort, and responsibility into a narrative that makes life intelligible again. Feeling lost, then, is not a personal defect. It is a predictable outcome of a world that removed necessity without replacing it with purpose. Frankl's work does not condemn modern freedom, but it insists that freedom must be anchored to responsibility. Without that anchor, the soul drifts. The existential vacuum and the rise of anxiety and burnout. Viktor Frankl used the term existential vacuum to describe a condition that feels deceptively mild at first, yet grows quietly destructive over time. It is not despair in the dramatic sense. It is the absence of inner orientation. People in this state often say they feel tired all the time, emotionally numb, or mentally overwhelmed, even when their lives appear stable. Frankl observed that this vacuum becomes the psychological breeding ground for anxiety, burnout, and depression in modern societies. Anxiety in this context is not fear of something specific. It is fear without an object. The mind remains alert because it senses a lack of meaning, not a lack of safety. Burnout follows a similar pattern. People assume it comes from doing too much, but Frankl argued that exhaustion more often comes from doing things that feel pointless. Effort without meaning drains the psyche faster than effort under pressure. When work, relationships, or routines no longer connect to a personal sense of purpose, even small demands feel unbearable. What makes the existential vacuum so dangerous is that it disguises itself as normal life. People keep functioning, they keep producing, they keep smiling. But internally, they feel replaceable, disconnected, and unnecessary. Frankl noticed that when individuals no longer experience themselves as needed by life, they begin to question their own value. This is where many modern psychological symptoms begin, not with trauma, but with perceived irrelevance. To escape this discomfort, people often seek relief instead of resolution. They numb themselves with constant activity, entertainment, social validation, or productivity. The schedule fills, but the emptiness remains. Frankl warned that when meaning is absent, the human being will accept almost any substitute, even suffering, just to feel something that breaks the numbness. Crucially, Frankl did not treat anxiety or burnout as isolated disorders. He viewed them as signals, indicators that something essential has been ignored. The psyche, in his view, reacts not only to stress, but to significance. When significance disappears, the mind protests. Symptoms are not always enemies to eliminate. Sometimes they are messages demanding interpretation. Feeling lost, anxious, or burned out does not necessarily mean you are weak or broken. It may mean that life has stopped feeling like a dialogue. Frankl believed healing begins when a person recognizes that meaning has not vanished. It has simply stopped being actively answered. The vacuum is not an ending. It is an unanswered question. Frankl's radical shift, life is questioning you. One of Viktor Frankl's most profound contributions was a simple but unsettling reversal. When people feel lost, they usually ask, "What do I want from life?" Frankl insisted this question is precisely what deepens the confusion. Life does not exist to fulfill our expectations. Meaning is not something life hands to us. Instead, Frankl argued that life is constantly questioning us, and our task is to respond. This shift changes everything. When a person feels directionless, it is often because they are waiting to feel motivated before acting. Frankl rejected this sequence. Meaning does not follow emotion. Emotion follows meaning. Waiting to feel inspired before committing to responsibility keeps the existential vacuum intact. The question is not whether you feel ready. The question is whether life is asking something of you now. Frankl learned this insight under extreme conditions, where personal preferences no longer mattered. In the camps, survival depended on answering life moment by moment, with dignity, courage, or inner resistance. He observed that those who oriented themselves toward a task, a person, or a value beyond their immediate suffering were more likely to maintain psychological coherence. Life did not become easier, but it became intelligible. Applied to modern life, this idea confronts a dangerous assumption that clarity must come before commitment. Frankl argued the opposite. Commitment often precedes clarity. Direction emerges through responsibility, not reflection alone. When people endlessly analyze their feelings without anchoring themselves to meaningful action, they spiral inward. Meaning pulls the mind outward. This does not mean blindly accepting obligations imposed by society. Frankl was clear. Meaning is personal and situational. No one can prescribe it for you, but it is always concrete. It appears in specific moments, relationships, and demands. The mistake many people make is waiting for a grand life purpose while ignoring the small, immediate questions life is already asking. Feeling lost often means you are asking the wrong question. Not, what should my life become someday? But what does this moment require of me? Meaning is rarely found in abstract answers. It reveals itself in response. Frankl believed that the moment a person stops demanding explanations from life and starts answering its questions, disorientation begins to dissolve. When you are lost, life has not gone silent. You may simply not be listening to the right voice. Meaning is not found within yourself. Modern culture often tells people that the solution to feeling lost is to look inward. Viktor Frankl strongly disagreed. While self-awareness is valuable, meaning does not originate inside the self. According to Frankl, meaning is discovered in the world, not within the psyche. When people turn inward excessively in search of purpose, they often deepen their sense of emptiness rather than resolve it. Frankl observed that the human being is not fulfilled by self-absorption, but by self-transcendence. Meaning emerges when attention moves beyond the self, toward a task to complete, a person to love, or a value to serve. When life becomes centered on personal satisfaction, happiness, or identity exploration alone, it creates a closed loop. The mind circles itself endlessly, searching for something it cannot generate internally. This is why so many people feel lost after achieving personal goals. They followed advice to focus on themselves, improve themselves, and express themselves, yet still feel disconnected. Frankl argued that the self is not a destination, it is a byproduct. When you commit to something beyond yourself, the self organizes naturally. When you obsess over the self, it fragments. Meaning, in Frankl's view, always points outward. It may appear in work that contributes something valuable to the world. It may appear in relationships where love becomes responsibility. Or it may appear in unavoidable suffering, where the way one bears pain becomes a moral stance. In all cases, meaning is tied to responsibility, not introspection. This challenges a deeply ingrained modern assumption that you must first understand yourself before you can live meaningfully. Frankl suggested the opposite sequence. By living meaningfully, you come to understand yourself. Identity stabilizes when it is oriented toward purpose, not when it is endlessly examined. Feeling lost, then, is not a signal that you need more self-analysis. It may be a signal that you have been turned inward for too long. The mind becomes restless when it has no object worthy of devotion. Frankl believed that the fastest way out of existential confusion is not self-discovery, but self-forgetfulness in the service of something that matters. Meaning does not ask, "Who am I?" It asks, "What is needed of me now?" Suffering, responsibility, and the choice that remains. Viktor Frankl never romanticized suffering. He was explicit. Pain is not meaningful by default. But when suffering cannot be avoided, the way a person responds to it becomes a source of meaning. This distinction is central to understanding why so many people feel lost even without visible tragedy. They are suffering, but without responsibility, without context, and without a framework that gives their pain direction. Frankl argued that modern life often removes struggle without replacing it with purpose. When suffering appears, in the form of loneliness, failure, exhaustion, or disappointment, people assume something has gone wrong. But Frankl believed that suffering is not always a malfunction. Sometimes it is a demand. Life may be asking for courage, endurance, or moral clarity rather than escape. Responsibility is what transforms pain from chaos into coherence. In the camps, Frankl observed that those who retained a sense of responsibility toward a loved one, a future task, or a personal value were better able to withstand extreme conditions. The suffering did not lessen, but it became intelligible. Meaning did not eliminate pain, it prevented despair. Applied to modern disorientation, this insight is unsettling. Many people wait for suffering to disappear before they re-engage with life. Frankl would say this delay is precisely what deepens the sense of being lost. Meaning is not postponed until circumstances improve. It is chosen within circumstances as they are. This does not mean accepting unnecessary pain or refusing to change unhealthy situations. Frankl was clear that avoidable suffering should be avoided, but when suffering is unavoidable, refusing to assign meaning to it only multiplies its damage. Pain without meaning becomes trauma. Pain with meaning becomes testimony. At the core of Frankl's philosophy is one uncompromising truth. Even when everything is taken away, one freedom remains: the freedom to choose one's attitude. This choice is not emotional, it is existential. It determines whether suffering becomes a dead end or a turning point. Feeling lost often comes from resisting responsibility in the presence of pain, not because responsibility is cruel, but because it is clarifying. When a person accepts responsibility for how they will respond, even in uncertainty, the inner fog begins to lift. Meaning does not remove suffering, it gives it a place. Why waiting to feel ready keeps you lost. One of the most common traps in modern life is the belief that clarity must come before action. People wait to feel confident, motivated, or certain before committing to anything meaningful. Viktor Frankl regarded this mindset as a subtle but powerful source of paralysis. Meaning does not arrive as a feeling first. It emerges through engagement, not before it. Frankl observed that when people feel lost, they often retreat into analysis. They examine their emotions, their options, their identity, hoping that reflection will eventually produce direction. But without action, reflection turns inward and collapses. The mind becomes trapped in loops of doubt. Frankl believed that meaning pulls a person forward only when they step toward responsibility, even without emotional readiness. In the camps, no one felt ready. No one felt inspired. And yet, those who oriented themselves toward a task, surviving for someone else, preserving dignity, holding on to a future responsibility, maintained psychological structure. They did not wait for internal certainty. They acted in spite of its absence. This applies directly to modern anxiety and burnout. People say they are exhausted, unmotivated, or unclear, and assume this disqualifies them from meaningful action. Frankl would say the opposite. Emotional depletion is often the result of meaning deprivation. Action aligned with responsibility restores energy before it restores comfort. Waiting to find yourself before committing to something meaningful reverses the natural order of human growth. Frankl argued that we do not discover who we are by introspection alone. We discover ourselves by answering life's demands. Identity stabilizes when it is oriented outward. This does not mean reckless action or blind commitment. It means recognizing that clarity is not a prerequisite for responsibility. Responsibility is a generator of clarity. When you accept even a small, concrete task that matters, especially one that benefits someone beyond yourself, the fog begins to thin. Feeling lost is often not a lack of insight. It is a lack of engagement. Frankl believed that life reveals its meaning gradually, in proportion to our willingness to respond. The question is not whether you feel ready. The question is whether life is waiting for an answer you are delaying. Meaning can be found even when life feels incomplete. One of Viktor Frankl's most counterintuitive insights was that life does not need to feel whole in order to be meaningful. Many people believe they will regain direction once everything comes together. When uncertainty ends, when wounds heal, when circumstances stabilize. Frankl warned that this expectation quietly postpones meaning indefinitely. Life is rarely complete. Waiting for completion before committing to meaning keeps people suspended in dissatisfaction. Frankl observed that meaning is not a final state. It is a moment-by-moment response. A life can feel fragmented and still be meaningful. A person can feel uncertain and still act responsibly. Meaning does not require resolution. It requires orientation. When individuals believe that coherence must precede purpose, they misunderstand how meaning operates. This misunderstanding fuels much of modern despair. People interpret incompleteness as failure. They see confusion as disqualification. Frankl insisted the opposite. Uncertainty often signals that life is still unfolding, still asking questions. Meaning appears precisely in unfinished situations, where values must be enacted without guarantees. In the camps, there was no closure, no certainty, no long-term security. And yet, Frankl witnessed moments of profound meaning, small acts of kindness, moral courage, and self-restraint that preserved dignity amid collapse. These moments did not resolve suffering. They redeemed it. Meaning did not depend on how the story ended, but on how it was lived. Applied to modern life, this insight is liberating. You do not need to solve your entire future to stop feeling lost. You do not need to understand your whole identity to act meaningfully today. Meaning lives in the quality of response, not in the completeness of circumstances. Feeling lost often comes from treating life as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a dialogue to be lived. Frankl believed that when people stop demanding total clarity, and instead focus on responding well to the present moment, meaning begins to accumulate. Not all at once. Quietly. Gradually. Life does not wait for you to feel finished. It asks how you will live now, unfinished as you are. When meaning returns, direction follows. Viktor Frankl emphasized that direction is not something you find first. It is something that emerges once meaning is restored. Many people believe they are lost because they lack a clear path. Frankl would argue they lack something more fundamental, a reason to walk at all. When meaning re-enters life, even in a modest form, direction begins to organize itself naturally. Frankl observed that people often confuse goals with meaning. Goals are future-oriented and conditional. Meaning is present-oriented and unconditional. A person may not know where their life is headed, but they can still know how to act now. When daily actions are aligned with responsibility and value, the future stops feeling chaotic. Direction becomes a consequence, not a prerequisite. This explains why many people feel disoriented after major transitions, loss, burnout, career change, or emotional collapse. The old structures that once supplied meaning disappear and nothing replaces them. Frankl believed that this disorientation is not a signal to wait passively, but to actively redefine one's responsibility in the new reality. Meaning must be recreated for each phase of life. It cannot be recycled unchanged. Importantly, Frankl rejected the idea that meaning must be grand or dramatic. Often it is found in modest commitments carried out consistently, caring for someone, doing one's work with integrity, upholding a value even when no one is watching. These acts quietly rebuild inner structure. As structure returns, the sense of being lost diminishes. When meaning returns, anxiety often softens. Burnout begins to loosen its grip. Not because problems vanish, but because life regains coherence. The mind tolerates uncertainty when it understands why it is enduring it. Meaning gives suffering a narrative context. Frankl believed that human beings are not destroyed by pain, but by pain that lacks meaning. The restoration of meaning does not instantly solve life. It restores orientation. And once orientation exists, direction can unfold. You do not need to know the entire path ahead. You need only enough meaning to take the next step responsibly. Feeling lost is not the end, but a call to responsibility. Viktor Frankl never treated the feeling of being lost as a failure. He saw it as a threshold, a moment when old meanings have collapsed, but new ones have not yet been assumed. This space is uncomfortable, disorienting, and often frightening, yet it is also where freedom becomes real. When inherited structures dissolve, responsibility can finally be chosen consciously. Frankl believed that life never stops having meaning, but people can stop responding to it. Feeling lost often means that familiar answers no longer work. The values that once guided behavior have weakened. The roles that once gave identity have shifted or disappeared. In this vacuum, many people assume something has gone wrong with them. Frankl would say something has gone right. Life is asking for a deeper answer. The crucial mistake is trying to escape this state too quickly. Modern culture treats disorientation as a problem to eliminate. Frankl treated it as a question to answer. When people rush to numb the discomfort through distraction, constant productivity, or borrowed identities, they silence the very signal that could lead them forward. The way out of feeling lost is not self-reinvention, but self-commitment. Meaning does not demand that you become someone new. It asks that you take responsibility for how you respond to what is already before you. This responsibility may be quiet, unseen, or difficult, but it restores dignity, and dignity restores orientation. Frankl's answer to feeling lost was not optimism. It was courage. The courage to accept that life is not obligated to make sense before we engage with it. The courage to act meaningfully even when certainty is absent. The courage to answer life's questions without guarantees. If you feel lost, your life is not empty. It is unfinished. And unfinished does not mean broken. It means open. Meaning does not arrive as a revelation. It forms as a response, one decision at a time. Feeling lost is not the opposite of meaning. It is often the moment meaning begins to demand you. If this message resonated with you, don't let it remain just reflection. Meaning is not found by watching. It is shaped by engagement. Subscribe to this channel and stay with this series, because the search for meaning does not end with one insight. It unfolds over time through understanding, responsibility, and action. The next video will take this conversation deeper, not offering easy answers but sharper questions that help life become clear again.